Hi there, my name is Ewan Nicholson. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Remembering Love. If you're new to this channel, this is a channel where we explore healing childhood trauma, PTSD, and all the various things in between. So if you like that kind of content, please like and subscribe. I put videos out pretty much every week. If you're not new to this channel, welcome back. Now today we're going to be looking at the subject of spiritual bypassing. Like, what is it to spiritual bypass? And you can see in the title of the video, what I'd like to explore today is the value of spiritual bypassing and why I feel it does have some value. So before I do that, what I'm going to take you through is a very basic and brief explanation of what is spiritual bypassing. And then I'd like to share with you my experience of spiritual bypassing. And also what I like to share in really simple details why I think spiritual bypassing has a value regarding the context it occurs within and the function of spiritual bypassing. So let's look into this. So to begin with, what is spiritual bypassing? When you hear the term and the word, what are people talking about? And it's pretty straightforward. It basically is the use of spiritual practices or beliefs to avoid core trauma and pain. So an example of spiritual bypassing is I'm going to be focusing on channeling a being from the plebeian galaxy to upgrade my DNA, rather than focusing on the fact that I was sexually abused as a child and I have all this core trauma as a result of that. Or I'm going to focus on the law of manifestation, the law of attraction to create the life of my dreams, rather than dealing with this core toxic shame that I'm living with. That kind of thing, where you're taking, often it's associated with new age kind of stuff, where you're taking kind of spiritual beliefs and really giving yourself to those things as a way of bypassing your core trauma or your core shadow work. So that's basically what spiritual bypassing is. And if you search YouTube or Google and read articles and watch videos on spiritual bypassing, there's a lot of good stuff out there. I watched a few before this video, but the basic kind of theme of it is this is what it is, these are things to watch out for, this is kind of how you know what spiritual bypassing is, this is why it's kind of problematic. More or less, that's kind of what gets expressed in various ways or forms. But what's interesting about the discussion around spiritual bypass, when you see videos about spiritual bypass, is it's generally something other people are doing. It's generally people don't get up and say, I'm a spiritual bypasser, I spiritual bypass. It's always something others are doing, or I used to do it back in the day, but now I've come to the realization that it's not a kind of good thing. So it's one of these things that it's always others that are doing it. And I just think that's a really interesting thing to start off with. Why is that? Why is it always others? If you talk to people about their relationship problems and the issues they have with their ex, it's always like, I dated a narcissist, or I was with a narcissist. Very few people say, oh, I'm a narcissist, I'm the abuser. It's always other people that have this kind of issue, and you step away from it. And not to say there isn't obviously narcissistic abuse out there, but it's just interesting the way people's minds work, the way my mind works, that it's always, I can look at others are bypassing, but I don't bypass. I used to, but not anymore. But I look back at my own history of spiritual bypass, and I've definitely been spiritual bypassing my whole life. And I look back and think, well, my interest in this, my interest in that was all part of this elaborate way to avoid my childhood trauma. And now I've gone to therapy and I'm dealing with it. I don't kind of do that anymore. But I have to assume if I couldn't see it back then, if I'm doing it now, I probably wouldn't see it now either. That's just the nature of how unconsciousness works. I could look back 10 years from now, when I'm 57, look and think, oh, when I was 47, I was also bypassing, but not in the way I used to, but in a different way. So we have to assume we don't know what we don't know. And it's always others are doing it. Maybe we're doing it. So what's the value of that? Why would that occur? And what's the context socially and culturally spiritual bypassing works in? And that's what I'd like to explore today, in the sense that the value of spiritual bypass, because what I see very clearly right now is we are in a bypass society, culturally, socially, economically. Our whole systems are set up to avoid pain, to inflict pain on one hand and avoid pain on the other. So denial, suppression and avoidance is how our culture operates. Period. There is just bypass. And there are degrees of bypass, there are degrees and levels of unconsciousness and destructiveness in that bypass. But it's just all bypass. Anything we avoid, suppress and deny and anesthetize and numb and push away or push aside is bypass. We have alcohol bypass, porn bypass, workaholic bypass. We have throwing ourselves into our smartphones and our televisions bypass. We have sport bypass. We have a society and culture that's built around bypass. Spiritual bypass is just one of many we can choose from to avoid our psychological and emotional pain, to avoid the pain of our human existence. As Laura K. Kerr, author of the book Disassociation in Late Modern America, A Defense Against the Soul, mentions in her blog, Daniel Lord Smale makes a connection between global capitalism, social hierarchies, and the body's reaction to threats. Smale argues capitalism exploits the body's survival responses, i.e. freeze, fight, flight, and submission, by creating the conditions of psychological domination, as well as providing relief from the feelings of powerlessness that capitalism and social hierarchies engender. According to Smale, capitalism generates stress through its unpredictability and hierarchical power structures, but it also alleviates stress by producing an economy organized around the production and circulation of addictive substances and practices. So if you add to that a global study that confirmed that 87% of people either dislike or hate their jobs, and this is done across like 43 different countries, what you have is a culture and society where people loathe to go to work, they're alienated, they're cut off, they're depressed, and then in addition to that same system, it provides the various release and distractions away from that stress. That's the world we live in. So in the midst of that, people grab hold of spirituality to avoid that pain, to avoid that psychological suffering that they're going through. And where I think it has value is, like, if you're not ready to deal with something, if you're not really ready to come to grips with a certain kind of pain, then, but you're forced to, then it can have a very kind of destructive aspect on yourself. So for me, when I look at the value of my spiritual bypass, there were certain periods, particularly in my 20s, where I just wasn't really ready or capable to come to grips with the trauma that I had. And I used spirituality to shield myself from that to some degree. But it did fulfill a function. It kind of got me through that without killing myself. It was definitely better than alcohol and drugs in terms of actual bypass. To take up meditation as a bypass, if that's what I'm using it for, compared to getting drunk every day, that's a preferable option. My older brother's trauma was so intense and so severe that he actually went crazy and killed himself. Now, he could have done with some spiritual bypass. Maybe if he was able to find some spiritual practices that shielded him from the intensity of that pain to where he got to a point where he could deal with it, maybe they would have had a function. Who are we to say people need to be dealing with their pain now? That avoiding that pain right at this particular point is something they shouldn't be doing. They should be facing it. Maybe they're not ready, maybe they're not safe, maybe they're not in a position psychologically and emotionally to do that. Maybe they don't have community structure or the availability to do that. Maybe they just got to function, put food on their family's table. Maybe they're just not ready for it. And maybe that spiritual bypass fulfills a very important function for them. Who are we to judge? Who are we to say that? And that's the issue with spiritual bypass. We are in a bypass society. I remember when I was like in my early 20s, I had a flight from Brisbane to London. I got on the plane, it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. I just started hitting the vodkas like immediately, like, because it's free. There's a woman sitting next to me, and I remember this specifically. She turned to me, probably 6 or 7 vodkas early in the morning in, and said, "Do you think you have a drinking problem?" And I was like aghast, like, are you kidding me? It's free. And so the peanuts, I'm just getting my money's worth. And there and then I just thought, oh, how ridiculous. Who the hell is she? And the reality is, yeah, who the hell was she on one level? If I did have a drinking problem, I had an awareness of that. She's just shamed me. And if I was in denial of that, I'm just going to avoid it. And it stuck with me because on some level I kind of knew maybe I was developing one or I kind of had one, but it wasn't helpful. It wasn't something that I was willing to listen to or hear. And it's the same with spiritual bypass, that who are we to judge others? Who are we to say, well, they should be doing this instead of that? When I was doing that, I wasn't ready for that. Am I still spiritually bypassing now? Probably. And as I grow and I work on my trauma and I work on my pain, I'd like to feel like I'm doing it less. I'd like to feel like I'm using externalities and things to avoid, but I just have to assume I'm doing that. I have to assume I am a spiritual bypasser. And the question is, if you're involved in spirituality, you're involved in anything, at times you're going to be grabbing hold of that and deflecting and avoiding. It's just the way our society's set up. It's the way our minds are set up to avoid pain. The question is, to what degree, to what extent? Can we just do that less and less and less and be more and more honest? And as we do that, and we're aware of, like, it's hard to deal with your pain. It's difficult to deal with stuff. I've got a good friend in Australia whose ex is dealing with an alcohol problem and he's really struggling with it. And I hear that and I just feel for him. It's like, it's so hard to give up booze. It's really, really difficult. And if you're not able to do it, I just think, God, like, I get it. Like, only by the grace of God and my support and help and a bit of luck, a bit of determination, I was able to kind of get through that. But if you're not, it's like, yeah, like, it really sucks. It's really hard. So I think when it comes to spiritual bypass, it's just one bypass among a myriad of bypasses. And in my opinion, to some degree, it can be a healthier form. If you're going to pick something to use to avoid your pain, it's better meditation than it is tramadol or dihydrocodeine. It's better tuning into crystals than it is snorting a line of cocaine, for sure. Or being destructive or hateful or angry. It's for sure, it's better than that. Now, is it exactly where and what's needed? Maybe not. But again, it's degrees. So I think when it comes to spiritual bypass, it's always one of these things, let's work on ourselves. Let's work on our own issues. Let's work on healing our own hearts and supporting others to be where they're at, to heal what they need to heal when they're ready, when they need it, to offer that hand when it's asked for, to support people where we can. But like all these things, all we can do is work on our own bypassing, on our own pain, and be supportive and unjudgmental to others. It's very easy to poo-poo and to laugh at all the new age people and what they're doing, and I do it. I'm not immune to that on one level. Look at them, they're spiritually bypassing. But who's to say they don't need that? Who's to say I'm not doing the same in just more of a sophisticated way? The reality is we're all in this. We're in a very difficult culture. That if most people hate their jobs, if most people are struggling financially, if most people are traumatized, re-traumatized, about 1 in every 4 girls has been sexually abused, women, 1 in 6 boys. It's, we live in a really tough world. And on top of that, we're meant to suppress it. On top of that, we're actively encouraged to suppress it. People profit from that suppression. There's going to be bypass, and we have to work out what we can handle, when we can handle it, in order to be able to move forward in a healthy kind of way. So look, I hope this has helped. I hope this has made sense. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you've got any comments or insights you'd like to share about spiritual bypassing, your own experience of this, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Please take care of yourself, and bye-bye.